Week 5 bus adventures.
This week, we began our journey at Yellowstone National Park. Now, this was really the only thing that we had planned for our journey when we left Houston, so we were really excited for it. We camped at Mammoth Campground, so of course, our first stop was going to be Mammoth Hot Springs. To be blunt and honest, it was probably the most boring thing that we saw in the 3 days we were there. You could smell the sulfur, you could see the thermal activity, but there wasn't much action. I read online that the springs actually dried up about 30 years ago, so we kind of saw the remnants of it, but it was still really cool. Despite the itinerary I'd made, we decided to change plans and we headed to Old Faithful on this beautiful road, and we saw what was our first glimpse of wildlife in Yellowstone. And along the way, we had a bit of an issue. Our dilemma here is I want to stop and look at every little thing, even when we find out that it's boring. I'm just too afraid of missing out. I made Devin stop, and this was all that we saw. Whoops. Not impressed.
By this?
No.
Come on, man.
It's some thermal
We're
activity.
at Yellowstone.
Okay.
I'll be impressed when I see Old Faithful.
Lo and behold, here is Old Faithful. Obviously, I'm going to put this in a more sped up time frame because it typically goes off for about a minute to a minute and a half. Now, in my defense, I thought it would be cool to go in the direction the wind was facing, not realizing that all of the smoke was just going to come hit us in the face. And it did hit us in the face. It sprinkled on us. Our eyes burned of the sulfur, but it was still a pretty cool sight to see. We had our famous dinner of a box of Kraft macaroni and cheese, and we were off to bed early because Tuesday morning we were awake before the sun was even up because we had to see all of the sights of Yellowstone. Elk are famous for wandering around the town of Mammoth, and as we were driving along, we saw more elk and heard one. I accidentally cut the recording off early, but it reminded me so much of the Polar Express scene where they are stopped by the elk and the elk is just screaming right in front of the train. Anyways, that was the Grand Canyon of Yellowstone. And next we just really drove around. We stopped where we thought we were seeing cool sights, like this beautiful sunrise right here. I liked to stop and look at every geothermal feature there was. I really enjoyed it, but Devin stayed in the car for this one. And I swear it's not in the video, but I saw a bald eagle right after I took this clip. And all of the clips that I've shown were in Hayden Valley. We were just driving through there. We stopped at the Continental Divide for a cute little picture. And then we made our way to Kepler Cascade, which honestly was one of the prettiest things that we saw that day. We went and watched Old Faithful again, but this time we stayed back because we wanted to eat snacks and let Cosmo come along and watch the journey this time. Cosmo didn't seem too impressed, but that's okay. We ended up seeing a different geyser, which is Beehive Geyser, and I thought it was cooler than Old Faithful, but that's just my opinion. We hiked our way up to the Grand Prismatic Overlook, and then we took the further route to Fairy Falls Springs. There was no springs, but the waterfall, in fact, was absolutely gorgeous. Our last stop of the afternoon was at Fountain Paint Pots, where you could see multiple different ponds, geysers. Apparently, this only goes off 4 times a day, and we just happened to be walking by when it went off. I do not know the name of it, but it was still neat to see. Then we went back and rested. And in the evening, we decided to drive to Lamar Valley, and along the way, we saw like 50 cars stopped. So we were like, oh my gosh, there must be something there. And we saw a mama bear and her 2 cubs, which was so cool. And what's even cooler is we saw the mom digging out a little den for them to hibernate in over the winter. And I was absolutely mind blown. I'm still mind blown. I cannot believe that we actually saw the bears. On our way back to our campsite, we had this beautiful sunset. And when I was a kid, I never understood why sometimes my mom cried during happy moments. But in this moment, I really understood because the sunset was so pretty that it just made me emotional, and I loved it. Wednesday morning was our final morning in Yellowstone, and we woke up to elk along the hillside, which was right next to our campsite. And then we hit the road, and we were on our way to Butte, Montana. When we got to our campsite, we found out the area was infested with bees and the bathroom was really gross. So although it was pretty, we decided we better move somewhere else. So we drove to Drummond, Montana instead. Drummond was just a small town for us to rest our head for one night, but I loved the fall vibes there. Listen to the leaves that we got to crunch through. Even Cosmo loved crunching the leaves. Thursday, we were on our way to Polson, Montana, and we stopped for the best thing we've bought so far, which is a heater.
People are gonna be like, why the hell does he wear the same clothes 5 days in a row?
I kept that clip in there, number one, because I thought it was funny, but number two, because we do rewear most of our clothes for multiple days because they really don't get that dirty when we're wearing them in cold environments. Now, the place we stayed for the rest of the week had some animals next to it, and Cosmo with his chicken was hilarious. He was fascinated by it and really wanted it. We also were next to 2 beautiful horses. Cosmo's a little skittish with the horses, but when we'd walk by, the horses would follow us, and I loved that. I thought it was really sweet. Friday morning, we went out to the Miracle of America Museum, which is honestly one of the coolest museums either Devin or I have been to in our entire lives. We spent about 2.5 hours wandering through this museum and looking at all of this stuff inside of it. We could have spent an entire day looking at all of the cool stuff like this snowmobile. Or back here we have an airplane. I point at the propellers, and then you will see that I point at the cockpit of the airplane. Devin found himself an old school motorcycle game that, of course, he had to try. Oh my God.
This is so hard.
Then we found a piano that plays a song for you when you put a quarter into it, and we were surprised to say the least. Devin found an old fire alarm. And we found another machine that would play a song for us, so of course we had to see it. This one was a violin. One thing that made this museum so special was if things had a green sticker on them, you were allowed to play with them, get on them, use them. So of course we used that to our advantage. And by we, I mean Devin playing in this helicopter.
We're going down! We're going down!
Someone was obviously having a good time with his imagination. Anyways, we found a one-room schoolhouse which had a playground outside of it, and I couldn't resist the urge to go down a slide, even though it feels like I haven't gone down a slide in I'm not sure how many years. And then we saw a stagecoach, which was strange because it felt really familiar, and I realized it's similar to the inside of our bus. The final space we went to in the museum was Area 51, and I was, of course, fascinated by looking at the rocket ships and the UFOs, and it was all fun and games until I myself got abducted by the aliens. We made it back to the bus just in time to watch the Astros and see them win for the second time this week. And we spent the rest of the night just hanging out. I've been reading Pet Sematary by Stephen King, and Devin was watching some Twitch streams, and we were just hanging out. Saturday morning, we were working on itineraries and plans for the rest of our trip. And here's our highs and lows for the week.
What's up? Week 5 highs and lows. Excuse the wind. It's really windy here. Alright, my high this past week was one, just being at Yellowstone in general. It was a beautiful place. It was awesome. But more specifically, the wildlife we got to see while we were there. We were really lucky, and Emma got to see a bald eagle. We got to see a mama bear and her 2 cubs, and tons of bison and tons of elk. So that was a really great thing.
I have 2 highs for this week. The first high is buying the heater. It is so warm and cozy. It's a game changer. It's a lifesaver. I'm so glad we bought it. It makes the bus so much more cozy. So That's definitely the first one. And the second was seeing Grand Prismatic. So every year in school, we would teach Archaebacteria, and Archaebacteria live in Grand Prismatic. That's what gives it that vivid color. The thermophiles, they really like the heat of it. And it's really cool also because nothing else can live there except the thermophiles, because it's just not a good environment to live in. But anyways, it's really cool to see what I teach every year in person and see the vivid colors and see the steam. So I really loved that. Cosmo's high for the week was the place we were staying at in Polson. Had tons of space for him to run around and play.
And for my low, there wasn't anything in particular this week that was bad or, my low, other than the forecast for next week when we're supposed to be at Glacier National Park. It is getting very cold very quick up here, and we're really trying to beat it, and we really hope we beat it, because if it snows there, pretty much gets shut down, and there's nothing really. There's only a few things that we can see, but not the great parts.
My low for this week, it was a really good week. The only kind of bad thing that happened was I was really excited to go to this local coffee shop in Polson yesterday morning. And I'd looked at it all week. I knew what I was going to get from the menu. Like, I was ready to go. And then we drove there yesterday morning. We were planning on working on our itinerary all day. And we got there and the store was closed. They hadn't updated their hours on Yelp. So we had to go to Starbucks, which was a little bit of a bummer because I don't want to go to chain places when we're in new environments. I would like to go to local areas, but Starbucks was great in Polson. Cosmo's low for this week was that he ended up catching one of the chickens where we were staying, but the low is that he did not get to eat the chicken.